Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namassami. This is the first talk back at the city centre after the 3 months of the rains retreat. And as I said earlier, the topic of the talk is equanimity. Someone asked me to speak about the path of practice. What do you have to do to develop equanimity? And equanimity has many facets to it, but it basically means to be able to keep the balance of one's mind through the ups and downs of life, of what we encounter in life, what comes into our life, and what leaves our life. And in fact, equanimity is, if you like, the highest state of mind. The fully enlightened one is completely equanimous with whatever comes and whatever goes, because they understand life completely. They understand about ups and downs and are not moved by whatever they encounter. In fact, in one of the chants that we do, we say that the fully enlightened one, though touched by worldly circumstances, never the mind is wavering. So this is really the end point of the path of practice. But as we progress along the path, we will have a taste of equanimity, of even-mindedness, of being able to hold our seat, not lose our balance because of what we encounter. And we have to realize that this equanimity is an internal development. It's an internal development which means that we are no longer swayed by what goes on outside. That doesn't mean we don't act and react, but we're not acting and reacting from a self-centered point of view. Now, in order to develop equanimity, one of the important things we have to realize is that every aspect of the Noble Eightfold Path that we develop, that we cultivate, contributes to the end result of equanimity. And so tonight I'd like to illustrate this by talking about the path in terms of the 3 divisions that we usually make: Sila, Samadhi and Panya. Sila being virtue or morality, Samadhi being the development of the mind in meditation, and Panya being the wisdom aspect that understands things as they really are. I'd like to show how each phase of the path, it's not that it's progressive, that you have to do Sila first and then you move on to Samadhi and then you do Panya. We're cultivating different aspects of each of these parts of the path continuously. But when we're trying to develop this balanced mind, everything we do on the path contributes to that. When we think about virtue, morality, we're thinking about developing good qualities, wholesome qualities, supportive qualities that help to make the mind strong, steadfast. A purified mind, purified of self-centeredness, greed and hatred, is a mind which is much stronger. The Buddha gave the simile of a mind full of selfishness as being like gold which is full of impurities. It's very brittle. It can't be worked into any kind of ornament until you take out the impurities. And then the mind, the gold, becomes very strong and pliable. It can be used to manufacture whatever shape you like. So the mind that is purified to whatever extent will be stronger and more pliable. And if you think about what we're trying to accomplish when we're trying to be equanimous, you might think that being pliable seems to run contrary to that idea, because pliable means that the mind moves or is bendable. But if you think of the image of something that is very brittle and contracted and tries to resist a force, it's more likely to break than something that is like plasticine, that is able to be moulded, like the reed that is soft enough to bend in the strong wind compared to the oak tree that tries to resist the wind. So the pliability of the mind is one of the things that allows us to receive experience, to acknowledge the reaction that's going on, but to refrain from acting on impulse in response to whatever we receive. The mind that is trained in virtue, particularly the mind which is trained in restraint through keeping the 5 precepts, gradually builds up the resilience to receive experience, to take the deep breath necessary, to resist acting on impulse, and to then have the space in which to choose wisely what the response should be to this situation. I can't overestimate or overemphasize how important the 5 precepts are for giving us protection from our self-centered impulses. If we make a commitment to keeping the 5 precepts and actively cultivating their opposites, within the restraint that comes from keeping the precepts and the cultivation that comes from developing their positive opposites, in that space we will find tremendous pliability, flexibility, resilience, to not be broken by what we experience, but also not to be swept away by our emotions, which may take us into unskillful speech and behaviour. These 5 precepts are really our friends, our protectors. They warn us when we're getting into dangerous territory, where we need to be careful, where we need to think twice. And by committing ourselves to keep them, we practice again and again saying no to those selfish impulses until we wear them out, we weaken them, and we give ourselves the possibility of doing something differently. A couple of stories that illustrate just how important these precepts can be as protectors for us. Also illustrate how we can often develop unskillful habit patterns because we do something initially with intention, consciously doing that thing, and then we get good at it. And because we get good at it, we do it again. And it becomes easier and easier for that particular behaviour to manifest. And that's why it's so important to use the 5 precepts as our standards. If we are going in the direction of breaking the precepts, we need to stop and think, what's happening here? Where will this lead me? Not just now, but in the future. Not just for me, but for others as well. And the future doesn't have to mean next week or next year. It can mean at the end of this conversation. So let me give you a couple of illustrations. One was a very interesting story someone told me about when they first were married and they had young children and they were staying at home and they didn't have any money of their own. Their husband was going to work. Every now and again they would like to go and check out their husband's wallet and see whether there were any extra coins in the wallet. And if there were lots of extra coins, they'd just help themselves to a few of those coins because they told themselves, well, after all, it's my money too, and he'll never notice. There's too many coins in there. I'll just help myself to a few. And it wasn't that they wanted it for themselves, but they wanted to have some cash that they could use to go and buy something for the children. And so they got in the habit of looking in their husband's wallet and taking the money. And they never got caught. And they actually enjoyed that thrill of getting away with it and knowing that they had this little secret. They told me when the children got older and they went to work and they earned their own money, every now and again they would still go and have a look in their husband's wallet and see if there were any extra coins there and if they could still manage to take a few of those coins without their husband noticing. And they would still get that same thrill to think that they had this little secret. And then they told me only when they started to practice and to keep the 5 precepts did they realise what had happened. That they had started out with a conscious intention to get something, which they justified to themselves, but it had become a habit pattern. It had become a habit that they enjoyed. And they got carried away with it because they didn't need the money, but they couldn't resist looking in their husband's wallet and taking out what they thought they could get away with. Now this is quite a mild example, but you can see that even in that situation the person has lost the balance of their mind because they're caught up in doing something without even full awareness of what they're doing. And they actually said to me, you know, I could see afterwards that it did affect my relationship with my husband because I always had this little secret. I was always a bit on edge in case he caught me out. Or he might say to me, where did we get that? I don't remember that we had one of those. And then I'd have to think, oh, we've had that in the cupboard for ages. You just haven't noticed it. Or, oh, someone gave it to the kids. Didn't you realise? And they realised that there was not only the effect of having to cover up, but just the fact that they weren't being truthful with their husband. Now, a much more powerful example of how habit patterns unskillful habit patterns get started and then get stronger and become easier to do until they cause tremendous heartache for ourselves and others. There's a story I heard of recently where a couple were drinking and they got drunk and they got into an argument, and the woman in the couple got so angry with her partner, but she was so out of control of her behaviour that she picked up her little baby and started to batter her husband with the baby, not realising that it was a baby that she was picking up. She was so drunk and so overwhelmed by her anger at that moment that she was completely oblivious to what she was doing. The child received a fractured skull and brain damage. Now, the interesting follow-up for that was the comment that her partner made when this was reported. His reported response was, "Everyone's making such a big deal of this, but you know, she didn't mean to do it." Now we can ask ourselves, yes, she didn't mean to do it, but the result is this. This child has permanent damage. This is how we can lose the balance of our mind when we live outside guidelines. Of course she didn't mean to do it, but her behaviour had gone long past the point where she was actually aware of what she was doing. And we can say in that situation, well, what is the point at which she was still responsible for what she did? Was it with the first drink that day? Was it with the first drink that she had where she got beyond the limit, out of control? Was it the last drink the night before that led to the first drink today, which led to the one that took her over the limit? You can see how we can lose track of where we started and also where it will take us to. We lose the balance of our mind, and sometimes we lose it and it has terrible consequences for ourselves and for others. So if we can make a commitment to sila, and we can train the mind to resist our selfish impulses when they're not overwhelming, when they're still manageable, little by little, we can take control of our mind, take control of our speech and our behaviour. And long before we get to the point where we're out of control in a very drastic way, we can know danger. Be careful. Stop and think before saying anything, before doing anything, before going any further. So this is how practicing sila helps us to hold our seat. It's not that we're not going to be affected by things. It's not that we're not going to have any emotional reactions. Our old tendencies will still be there, but we start to rein them in. We start to train the mind, and we practice at saying no when it's easier, and little by little we develop that strength of mind, that pliability to receive what happens without overreacting or reacting in an unskillful way, because we've not only practiced restraining again and again, but we've also practiced cultivating the opposites. So refraining from harming and cultivating loving kindness and compassion. Refraining from taking what is not given and cultivating generosity and willingness to share. refraining from sexual misconduct, particularly committing adultery and interfering in established relationships, and cultivating contentment with what we have. Cultivating trustworthiness, living up to our promises. Refraining from wrong speech, harsh speech, speech which is untrue. Telling stories about people and cultivating speech which is honest, speech which is kind, speech which is bringing people together. And refraining from using drugs and alcohol because they confuse the mind. They make it easy to break any of the other precepts, as we see through this story. And developing the mind in meditation, practicing mindfulness to become consciously aware of what's in our mind and what is arising in our speech and our behaviour. Now, the next part of the path is samadhi, and this doesn't just mean meditation, it means starting to observe the content of the mind before we speak and before we act, looking to see what's going on in there. Maybe no one else knows, but we should know what's going on in our own mind. And if it's beneficial, encourage it, cultivate it. If it's not beneficial, then work to not feed it, allow it to cease. When we're cultivating the mind in meditation in order to develop equanimity, we have to know our own tendencies. We have to know what things does my mind need in order to stay more balanced. For me to hold my seat when the good things come or when the unwanted things come. Remembering that we can lose the balance of our mind because we get so excited and overwhelmed with what we want or what we're going to get, pleasant things, as well as losing the balance of our mind when unwanted things arise or when things that we want to keep are lost. So it's keeping our seat through the ups and the downs. And so we have to know whether we run towards greed and desire or whether we run towards ill will and anger. We have to know what's the appropriate medicine for our illness. And we also have to see what situations are happening in our life right now that might be pushing us further than we've been before, really making us struggle. So we might normally be quite peaceful or quite able to deal with hostility, and yet we find ourselves in a situation, for example, where we're at work, where we're with someone every day and we have a hostile relationship with that person.